In Australia, Britain, Italy, Uganda, Turkey, India, South Africa, the US, and so many other countries, a dangerous pattern emerges when the economy is strained and governments need someone to blame. They target migrants and refugees.
If we don't influence the general public as well as the policymakers, this xenophobia, hate, resistance, hostility will not go away. Because no matter where we are from, regardless of our skin color, religion, whatever, I believe there is some shared value we all share as human beings.
Once in a while, there is shared evidence of those values, like when the world welcomed Ukrainians fleeing their homes after Russia invaded. It was a response that proved that another way is possible.
There is love, empathy, and human feelings, and understanding and all this. So that is a very most important piece to bring back again and awaken again. Look, this, whatever you label them, refugees, asylum seeker, whatever, they are human like you and me. They have, feelings, they are empathetic like you. By showing this love and humanity, you don't lose, actually you win. So that concept is missing.
But in reality, not all refugees receive such a welcome. And that's clear to many, whether you're a refugee or a UN official trying to help refugees. Welcome to Power Shift, an experiment in dialogue that asks, what's possible when decision makers and those affected by their decisions sit down and talk? I'm your host, Melissa Fundira. Today, we continue to listen in on the discussion between Hafsar Tameesuddin, a stateless Rohingya refugee and LGBTQ+ rights activist.
I hope that Raouf will have open mind and willing to listen and reflect with me and safe conversation. We then both can learn from each other. How do we improve the sector for the greater cause? Beyond me and Raouf, it's not about us, it's about the cause.
And Raouf Mazou, UNHCR's Assistant High Commissioner for Operations, who's been with the UN's refugee agency ever since he joined in 1991.
What do I hope to get out of there? A better understanding of the dynamics that are there, whatever they are, assistance, support, human rights, power, etc., and see how we can do better in the future.
Set up after the Second World War, UNHCR was mandated by the United Nations to protect and safeguard the rights of refugees and to support those internally displaced or stateless. However, the organization is often at the mercy of its donors and can struggle to challenge the policies of host governments. And the number of people forced to leave their homes continue to rise every year. Both Hafsar and Raouf say there's room to do better, especially as governments increasingly use migrants and refugees as scapegoats. Growing up in Myanmar, Hafsar understands this intimately.
As a child, I experienced discrimination and then this exclusion. Even when I go to school, if I'm walking on the street, other ethnic groups who are not stateless like me, they will call me with a derogatory term. Sometimes they will involve physical abuse, and the teachers from the school will never take action or seriously because you are literally not in the record, right? Not in the system. Nothing protect you. And then when I was in Malaysia, and then I saw many other refugees who are going through terrible, terrible human rights violation in daily basis, I found out if we don't fight for our own rights, no one will liberate you unless you fight for yourself as the oppressed community. And I thought you can either be powerless or you can start doing something that you can within your power and capacity.
Now resettled in New Zealand, Hafsar is the Co-Secretary General of the Asia-Pacific Refugee Rights Network. Hafsar identifies as queer and uses both she and they pronouns, and you'll hear us do the same throughout this episode. Meanwhile, in his role at the UN, Raouf oversees UNHCR regional bureaus and leads efforts to provide longer-term solutions for displaced and stateless people, which he recognizes is not always widely supported.
There is hostility about people finding themselves in a situation of displacement or migration in some parts of the world. But in other parts of the world, you still see the tradition of hospitality, of welcoming people that exists. So I think it's important to constantly make a difference and not necessarily see the world in a uniform way, because circumstances are very, very different.
That said, it is hard to ignore the rising vitriol from politicians and media towards migrants and displaced people. Raouf says, when it comes to integration, fears often overtake facts.
If one looks at the reasons why host communities may be hesitant when they see population arriving, migrants, refugees, internally displaced persons, the host population fears that those arriving will take away the little that they have, if I just put it in the most blunt way, anywhere around the world. So there is often an issue of ignorance of the reality, ignorance of what wealth those arriving as refugees or internal displacement actually bringing to the community where they are arriving. And this is documented, and it's important to communicate that. And there is often an issue of lack of communication about what are the figures, what are the issues, and then there is politicization, which is a reality. If you look at the number of people who are moving towards the north as compared to those who are moving towards the Western world, as compared to those who are moving within regions which are not necessarily the richest and the wealthiest, the numbers are clear. It's a few percent moving towards the Western world, and a very large number of people displaced either in their country or within the regions where they are. We're also moving in a world where you have more and more violence, more and more displacement, where the effects of economic inequality globally are now being seen in a very graphic and dramatic way. And the response that we're providing to the victims of this situation must be one that helps those who find themselves in a situation of displacement achieve some level of normalcy as fast as possible for a solution eventually. Because that's what we're talking about, whether it is going back to one's place, staying where one is, or being resettled for refugees. But the person is at the center, must be at the center, and must be given the tools, the means to decide for oneself what one wants to achieve. And this is what we have to all work towards.
There are some groups who are being described by the own government as the security threat. It is between the government itself, communicated, not publicly, and then some government intentionally show hostility towards one particular or two particular refugee groups, if you want to put it. Because of that, they become the target when and if there is anger and frustration arise from the local community. One example is COVID. When COVID happened, there are countries who have enough money to provide stability to their own people. There are countries who don't have money. Then what they did, the government, they find the most vulnerable group, the most marginalized group, and they then alter the hate and the anger and the frustration to this group. Look, because we have these people in our country, now you don't have enough. And then what the people do, they consume it, whatever the government feed. And then they then show hostility, physical abuse, and all this towards this vulnerable group. So again, there is power. These people will live experience, and refugees and forcibly displaced people have zero power to defend themselves and to tell the truth of why they are displaced and what is their intention in those refugee camp and host country. They are vulnerable across in many different ways. They are targeted by government, they are targeted by the local communities, politicians, they are a subject to win the vote and all of that. So to achieve this integration in some country context, you cannot even use for some government integration. It's a very sensitive word. Some government do not like it. They don't want to use it. So I think there are a lot of works to do, and also really needing to look at critically educating the people when the government of their own country is not responsible for their poverty, lack of employment, social security not inadequate. The government should be accountable, not the refugees, not the displaced people, not the stateless people, not the migrants. Why would they be? It's the job of your government, not creating enough job, not responding to the crisis in timely manner. This marginalized group, they have nothing. These poor oppressed community are so defenseless. So there is the need to bring people along with us. NGOs and a bunch of organizations cannot deal with all of this. We need this human connection, human understanding from different people, different group, including this, people who hold so much power, this political leader, their political will, diplomatic will, and securitization. And the power, we cannot forget the power of the people either. They are the most powerful folk. We need to also take into consideration as well.
No, that's very clear. And if I may add on this one, the love and empathy, I must say that in many places where I travel around the world, I see host communities willing to help, giving everything that they have. So there is a tendency to talk about hate all over the world, which is amplified in social media. But we still have people who cross borders, who are seeking asylum and who are being received by communities and help and support. And I think that's important to underline that and to celebrate that. The word integration is in many contexts toxic, to put it bluntly. And therefore, what one is talking about, if one says, do you want the person who has come as a refugee, as a migrant, to be self-reliant, or do you want the person to be integrated? What is being spoken about is self-reliant. Integration is another concept or something that takes a bit more time and a different nature. But it's really at least to ensure self-reliance. The person who achieves self-reliance may stay, may go back, may be resettled, but at least the person will have achieved that level of being able to choose rather than to be dependent on the choices of others. The responsibility of government is very clear, and I think it has to be underlined. And Hafsar, you're right in underlining that when knowledge comes, people take decision, and we've seen that in a number of places around the world. And at some point, the power of the people is what triumphs, and I think that's something that we see. Also used by the same social media, which are sometimes seen as negative, but the social media do give some additional power to the people, of course, used in different contexts, different ways. But at the end of the day, it can be used to make sure that one is aware of what is happening, and one then has the agency, the power, the strength to actually come together and ensure that the word of the people at the end of the day is heard.
I have seen now people are questioning. In the past, people will put up with the things, with nonsense, what the politicians will feed into, the people with power will feed into. They will just not have now in different part of the world. I'm now seeing on the social medias and news that people starting to question the people in power, people starting to critically criticize their own government and policymaker and evaluate. And then, the power of the people is actually getting somewhere. So that gives me hope. And that gives me a lot of hope that people are actually now thinking, questioning, and challenging the system. They are not always putting up that they used to in the past. So that is my biggest hope now. I have been thinking a lot about the type of power that Raouf has and the type of power that I have. Power is not a bad thing. If people use power, it brings so much positive impact. But if people abuse power, consciously and unconsciously, there is the danger. So we also, have to be not only reflective about ourselves, also have to be critical about what we see in the sector. I know it is difficult to be the one who is calling the people out. I think such and such leader here is being a bit biased and abusing the power. Therefore, we need to, let this person step down for the greater cause. There's a difficult confrontation to make. And it is not comfortable for many of us, to be sitting in that uncomfortable space and talking about the uncomfortable truth and then also being critical and then doing the right thing for the greater cause. It's not easy things to do, but we have to do it. If we always follow the easy path and, happy, fancy in this, we're going to find ourselves in the next 20 years in the same place.
So I'm going to ask you both to sit in that discomfort for just a minute.
Moderating all of our Powership conversations is Lena Srivastava. Lena is the founder of the Center for Transformational Change.
I'm wondering whether you have a shared vision around how you achieve, how you move past this particular moment, right, towards a more equal sort of leadership process or participation or any of these things that we've been talking about. Do you have a shared vision of how to do that, the two of you or the communities that you represent?
I'm very sure the very first reason of why I am doing my job and why Raouf is doing this job is because we both believe in this humanitarian and human right of these people and displaced population. So this is what our goal is, and we would like to achieve it. And the reason that we are now having this power conversation is it's not only in displacement and refugee sector, it has been in many scenarios like indigenous population across the globe, not having equal opportunity, not having the agency to have a say in the matters that concern with their life. So it has not been done in the past. That is why we are doing it, because we have this shared vision. And what needs to happen is that being very comfortable to be honest about our limitation, being very transparent and respectfully talking about our strength, and then finding the place of where we can complement each other. It's not about if we are looking into either or, it's going to be never-ending confrontation and argument and debate. There is no either or. What we need to find is finding a place of leaving our pride and whatever it is, coming with humility and engaging in this conversation of telling our limitation, talking about our strength and where and how do we see both parties can contribute and complement for this greater shared vision of this protection and promoting of the rights of displaced people across the globe and in different contexts.
This brings to mind a couple of different things that we've talked about in our last conversations. You said something, Hafsar, very interesting about anger. You said that there is so much anger that you are holding because of power imbalance, but also because of your situation. I want to hear a little bit more about this idea, this feeling, really, of anger or suppressed anger and where that might help open up discussion. And also, Raouf, I mean, is that something that you are aware of or that you sense, and how do you receive that?
Well, I have my fellow activists and advocates who have lived through this never-ending oppression, never-ending atrocities in a system that is so unjust and unfair. So we all carry this, anger of not being able to say the truth, not being able to claim our rights and all of that. So when you carry so much frustration in your heart and in your mind, and constantly you go to the same thing, asking for the same thing that you have been requesting and asking 10 years ago, and now you come back, you're saying the same thing. So sometimes the wording that people like me and activists use may not be very diplomatic in a way that, very formal in a sense. It will be very raw sometimes because it's come from your heart with the feelings, anger, frustration, the thirst and quest for justice. It's very raw language. And then that kind of raw, authentic language can be sometimes seen as an aggressive, angry activist. So in that kind of scenario, what I think would be very helpful is that for the people who have not lived that life, instead of jumping into a conclusion, is that activists are so angry all the time, they demand, they don't appreciate what we have been doing. Instead of going and jumping and saying that, what would have been really helpful is that just listen and be there with them. Okay, I hear you. Tell us, what can we do for this and with you? That would be really helpful. And I think in a way that will cool those people down and really feel, okay, now at least somebody listened to us, or 2 people listen to us, or 5 people in this room listen to us. They are willing to work with us. So that would be really helpful in it, instead of, coming into conclusion, oh, you're always angry, ungrateful, unappreciative of whatever we have been doing for so many decades. Yes, you have been, but there is also, the reality is that the forward movement, the positive movement and impact in this space happen very slow and in a smaller scale. But then the people who have been living in this oppressed community, they have lived many decades. They have witnessed endless atrocities and oppression happening to their own family members, to themselves, so much they have been suppressing in their heart and mind. And then there's a smaller little impact and improvement happening. So it's a very big imbalance. And I must say, as an activist myself, for my fellow activists, they have every single right to be frustrated. They have every single right to be angry about. They have been treated very unfairly. They have been experiencing this injustice. It is their right to be angry. And I wouldn't say going, oh, shut up, don't say anything. I would instead go, okay, I hear you. I know how does it feel like. Tell me what can we do. So that would have been a lot easier and peaceful way of collaboration between.
I hope this is what we're doing.
Yes, we are.
My experience is that we were actually set up to deal with that frustration that you describe, Hafsar, and to respond to the need, which sometimes government cannot hear. Government which provides asylum to a group of refugees, the refugees are complaining. You have people who say, but we gave you asylum and that's it. But we are there to play that role here, translate sometimes the frustration that is heard for some of the interlocutors' understanding. It's clear that if one finds oneself in a situation of exile, lost rights, and everything that refugees go through, you have the right to be frustrated, you have the right to be angry. Who wouldn't be angry? And one thing that actually we have done more recently and which we have not done necessarily 20, 30 years ago was psychosocial support, because you do have, and it's not just talking about the leadership, it's the entire population that has gone through extreme trauma, and they need to really invest much, much more resources and attention in this. And these are things that are being done. We need to do more of this. This is our role, to hear that frustration and to transform that frustration and that anger into something that is not toxic, but something that is positive and can help the community then rise in the new environment in which the community finds itself. Often what we see is that when refugees are given the tools, the help required to become self-reliant, sorry to come back to that, they do much better than the host community. And because of that, so to transform that frustration, that anger into something that can help, and through, of course, responding to the needs and then trying to put in place mechanisms and systems that respond to the needs that are expressed, the concerns that are expressed.
You mentioned psychosocial support, which, it moves beyond the provision of material needs. In my experience, there are a lot of narratives around refugees and displaced people and asylum seekers that label people as that status, right? That people are then reduced to the status of refugee or asylum seeker. And it doesn't recognize their whole humanity. Hafsar, you carry multiple identities within you. Most people do, right? But you're very vocal about it. How do we make sure then when we're working with individuals and communities of displaced people, that all of the identities that they hold, all the vulnerabilities, all the cultural markers that they carry, all of that is held, that is respected, that is celebrated, that is considered when programs or interventions are considered? Is it important that those things be considered? And if so, how do we do that as a sector? How do we shift the narrative around what refugees and asylum seekers and displaced people are?
A friend of mine described me that he said, Hafsar, your position is a position where it is so exposed. It also gives you a lot of opportunities to speak up, also put you at risks and vulnerabilities. And that stuck in my mind because sometimes I find really difficult to fit into places because I don't fit into one. I am many things. So it's really difficult. And also these identity things. Still, I feel for some communities, LGBTQ plus communities and others, and people are like, look, we even have them in the room. So the way how they describe is like giving you a special privilege. That needs to change. It is their right to be in the room. And just because you have a friend, a refugee friend, an LGBTQ friend, that doesn't make you a very, how do we call it, very special, compassionate human. Forget about all the labels. Just see the person, human, as a human. Instead of putting, a refugee friend, a queer friend, a whatever friend. If you are in a very prominent place with many big important people in the room and you start talking people, oh, are you a refugee? I have never met a refugee who can speak English like this. Or are you a refugee and a Rohingya and you already got this? And I'm like, oh my God, why do you act as if it is something you have never seen? Come on, I am a human. Yes, I am an activist. I'm an advocate. I belong to different identities, but above all of that, I am a human, which means I am capable of doing everything that you do. I'm like, oh my God. In a lot of ways, I feel we're still living, I don't know, in the past. We call ourselves as a progressive generation and civilized generation. I often struggle to identify as one. Do we actually understand what the meaning of civilization? Do you actually understand what does it mean to be progressive and embracing people as they are? Well, it's a massive work to do in this space, a lot of things to do. But one practical things that we could do is that really looking inside us deep within, what are the things that we are actually struggling? Do you struggle to sit and walk with a refugee with multiple identities? And so if that is the case, be honest with yourself and walk with that resistance, walk with that fear of, whatever identities that the person holds, and ask yourself the question, is it really this humanitarian sector that, INGO, is it really my space to be in? Because I have problem with, I am homophobic. I have problem with refugees being able to do such and such things. I have problem with asylum seekers being such and such problem. And I have problem with seeing people of colors. Then maybe it is not my space. So one thing that we could and we should do is that really be honest with ourselves. What are the things that we are actually struggling to accept, embrace, and adapt into this space? If there are things that I am struggling, when I call myself being the person in the humanitarian space, and it is my responsibility to go and work with my psychiatrist, to walk through my fear and my resistance of another human because of all the labels, all the identities that they hold. Is it somewhere else that I need to go and work, or is it really my space to be here?
I fully agree with Hafsar on all what he said. On refugee workers, it's people working in the refugee space. It's very clear that the person must be very conscious and aware of the realities of the world. And this is not a job or a place where you come with biases. You have to make sure that you understand the need of those you're dealing with. On the label, I was in Zambia a few weeks ago, and there was a traditional chief who told me, you cannot say for more than a generation that somebody is a refugee. This is not a label that should stuck on. And the interesting thing is that this traditional chief was actually saying that the way we were dealing with refugees was not the right one. They were definitely talking about inclusion. They were definitely talking about self-reliance. And they were definitely saying that the refugees were their people who had simply crossed a border which they considered not a reality, and that they were being helped at some point, and that later on they would help the community. So that's how they were seeing that. The label was not what you see in certain contexts. But again, I think the label is a result of a system that has been there for some time, which was the label was actually the right way or the best way to mobilize resources, to ensure rights, to say they are refugees, they are in that location, you need to provide them with assistance, you need to, until they can go back to their place of origin. The objective was not inclusion. The objective was not to say the refugees need to live normal life like everybody else. That was not the objective because of the perception that the displacement would not last long and then it would. So I think there are changes there. And it's integration and inclusion in the society that is welcoming refugees, which is the objective, as fast as possible, and using all the means for that.
Hafsar, one of the ways that could be implemented to bridge the power gap that we've been talking about is for people to make themselves a little more accessible, right, to communities. Do you feel like the agencies that you deal with, for example, UNHCR or other organizations, do you feel like they're accessible to the people that they're serving or that you are part of? If not, what would it take to address that?
UNHCR has come a long way. If I look at back 10 years ago, so there was two different part of me. So when I was a refugee in Malaysia, at that time I was receiving support from UNHCR, and I was working as an interpreter and translator for UNHCR, which means I have to deal with a lot of refugees coming into UNHCR for registration, resettlement, and different aids, yada yada. But then in Malaysia, by the time I was the refugee between 2011 to 2019, there was about 150,000 something refugees there registered under UNHCR. But then UNHCR can only accommodate very small number of people each day to see, understandable, due to limited access and resources and stuff, etc. But what is really, really difficult for many communities, including myself, is that when your case is under UNHCR processing, you never know what's going to happen next. And then if people are coming to UNHCR for any desperate help and support, if you come without an appointment, nobody will listen to you, no matter how urgent your problem was. And I really struggle between limitation of resources versus community needs, because in a country like Malaysia and Thailand, there was no convention signed and people are unprotected. For the people even to come to the gate of UNHCR is a risk. And then they're lining up this line of refugees standing there to be seen by an officer. And then some of them come because they have an appointment. Some of them come because of desperation of needs, even if they don't have an appointment. Sometimes they're like, okay, I got a phone call from UNHCR 4 years ago. Until now, there is no progress. What is happening with my case? They want to ask. So it is really inaccessible in a way. And I always feel like, okay, it's okay if you cannot process all the refugees, which is impossible to process 100,000 refugees. But at the very least, can you please make sure that people know what is happening with their lives? Can you please make sure that, when they call UNHCR, they ring UNHCR number, it is a number that actually ring and then answer. And particularly there is a number called hotline number for arrest and detention. It is really, really difficult if it's happened over time, because once refugee in countries like Malaysia and Thailand get arrested and detained, and if you did not manage to inform UNHCR, you will be stuck in those detention for many, many long times. And then because the policy of those countries are also very, very tight, sometimes the countries themselves, the government themselves will stop UNHCR even to be sent to the detention. For first place, you did not manage to inform UNHCR that you were arrested. Second, as UNHCR in those countries are not allowed to visit the camp. So it means people can be in the indefinite detention, which is really difficult. So in that sense, I think now they have made some improvement. I visited to UNHCR Malaysia, some improvement happening, but still there could be a lot of things that can be done. And I actually suggested UNHCR representative from Malaysia is that when UNHCR is also facing this financial hardship like many of us, including our network, when UNHCR also have to cut off their staff, I said, can we work with the community themselves? Can we work with the local organization and NGOs and the refugee community themselves? If you train the refugee leaders and communities how to do the very basic data collection bit, and then you do the system bit, and then in that way, the workload can be shared, and then there is a community representative from each community. You then liaison with these community leaders and tell the refugees, look, for this Karen, Kachin, and Burman refugee, this is happening. The case informations are here and all that. So I thought that could be a way of bridging those accessibility gap instead of putting all the burden and responsibility alone to UNHCR. The only thing is that I think UNHCR and other actors, including refugee leaders and communities, need to have honest and transparent conversation about our strength, our limitation, where are the things that we cannot do, where are the places that we cannot go beyond due to risk factor or limitation to resource, money. So in that way, it will then create kind of a holistic, approach and framework that can, respond this refugee and humanitarian need in a more comprehensive manner, in a more sustainable manner. Because now it's not accessible. So Also, in the other context of now, this representation with UNHCR is trying their very best. I can see some changes are happening, but still what I'm not convinced and satisfied at this point, if it's the right word, is that there is unnecessarily needing an entity or individual in between to facilitate accessibility of the communities for representation, for participation, for inclusion, and to have a say. So that's a long way to go. But then I think the ideal world that I would like to see is a world where, we don't have to go through a person. People don't have to go through Hafsar to talk to Raouf. They can just, Raouf there, I can email him. And, there was an event, I would like to go. And I don't need to be someone to go to that event. I can just ask information and I can apply for it. So all this barrier, unnecessary things need to be bridged. Yeah.
Raouf, I see you nodding and taking notes. And is what Hafsar said possible?
What Hafsar said is something that when I was a UNHCR representative in Kenya, we had about 600,000 refugees, and each refugee considered rightly that I was responsible and accountable to provide support and to respond to anything that was needed. And that's probably one of the strengths and also challenges of UNHCR, is that we deal with individuals who have specific problems and consider that you are UNHCR, you resolve my problem. And my problem, even if it's among 800,000 people, is a problem that I want you to resolve. And that's how we set up and that's how we work. So how did some refugees reach to me? Through Twitter sometimes. We don't say Twitter anymore, it's X, but it was to through a message. But would simply say, put my name and say, I need help, and I could try and follow up through that. But of course, 800,000 people, 800,000 messages that way is not workable. So what we've tried to use as an organization is a methodology that Hafsar made reference to earlier, is to have call centers, and technology has helped us deal with more and more calls, and then use different ways to make sure that the situation that Hafsar described, where you have an emergency case, somebody that doesn't have an appointment needs to be seen immediately, that it could be handled and that they could be accessed through that. So things are improving. One point, and Lina, you will tell me that it's almost an obsession for me, but reducing the number of people who are dependent and actually need assistance is really the number one strategy. To then have to deal with a smaller number of individuals who can't manage and need specific support. It's also, especially in urban contexts, to try and make sure that national systems of dealing with people who have social needs can also be accessed, because there are mechanisms that are placed. So you multiply the way people can be assisted and supported through also using the existing mechanism. But if I compare to 20 years ago, I think things are moving in the right direction, more technology, more tools, which are now available and allowing us to do that direct interface, which I think is the strength of UNHCR, but also one of the challenges.
I don't think you're obsessed with self-reliance. It's a goal, it's a stated goal, and I think that's great. However, is there an effort to create more sort of collaborative structures, right? When you look at the populations that you're working with and you're trying to help them become self-reliant, you're trying to help these refugees and asylum seekers become self-reliant individually, collectively, and you want to work with other organizations or government bodies and work with the populations themselves. How can you make sure that it's a collaborative structure instead of something where the refugees are just moved through a system without a lot of say?
I think the shift that is happening now, when it comes to refugees again, because the whole humanitarian system is, I don't want to speak about, is to implement and to design programs that are focused more as early as possible to ensure that the displaced person can become self-reliant. So that's the vision. Now, the big difference between this vision and the vision that we had up to 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, the big difference is that 10 years ago, the objective was to make sure that assistance was provided in the best possible way to the maximum number of people with the resources that were available for as much as possible. So it was to provide humanitarian assistance, and that's it. There were some livelihood activities, but that was not at the center of what we did. Now, which type of organization and which kind of interface do you need to put in place with refugees and displaced persons when you do that shift and when the objective is no longer to just provide humanitarian assistance is what we are looking at now and discussing. And I would be very pleased to hear from Hafsar what they think that could be implemented to achieve that goal. It's a change that we are going through now. I think it's a positive change, but the interaction with the refugee population and with the representative of the refugee population will be different, and new mechanisms, new interaction, new tool have to be put in place.
I believe there was goodwill from both ends, from both UNHCR and from mine. It's just what is missing from my observation is that human interaction and relationship, and really building relationship with the grassroots and really understanding that, because I'm a believer of collective leadership, and I am a very strong believer of the power of the people. And when people tell me, oh, they don't know, I have to do this for them, I'm like, no, give me a break. They do know about their things. They don't need us to save them. So what it has been missing is, I think, traditionally, historically, we walk a bit remote from the community itself, unless there is a pressing need, to actually visit to the refugee camps and really understanding it, we can't, because for the people like, Filippo Grandi, he is so busy. How can he go to refugee camps? Or that he cannot. He can only go for once in a while, and others, that connect a bit of gap, really having that human connection and understanding, and then really working in a consistent manner, not just one of things, we're going to do this global forum things once in 4 years' time and all that. It's just having those milestones and consistent interaction and communication across different layers of, communities level, grassroots level, local organization level, INGO, NGOs, all this. There is a chain of communication that will actually enhance our understanding of the ground realities. And then there is the limitation from the kind of organization like UNHCR, what are their limitations, what are their strengths, also the strength of the community itself on the ground, Also going back to your point, Raouf, about self-reliance, yes, community want to become, independent, they want to become self-reliant, but then what is it exactly that they need to become self-reliant in their country context, in their community context, and what does it mean, for their gender intersectionality through their community lens, what does it mean, and what can we give them? So in a lot of ways, I feel there is goodwill from UNHCR, from the communities, and all of us. We all want to do good things and want to accomplish something great. But then what is missing is that this kind of thing, conversation, communication, a change of communication that will actually make us understand about, different things. So in a way, because we're too busy, there are so many emerging humanitarian crises, we just cannot afford to make, or we don't make enough effort to really have this connection and consistent communication, to really not to be isolated. Why do we have to be isolated between the big NGO, smaller NGOs, local communities, and grassroots and refugee-led organization? Why do we have to be isolated and disconnected? We need to be connected. So I don't know. It's a $1 million question in my head. How do we stay coordinated? How do we stay informed and connected and keep this consistent communication between us and among us, so we know what is happening, what is needed, and with the very limited resources and expertise that we have, we are in the position to deliver a comprehensive need-based, support to the communities. So I think what is missing is that transparent and consistent communication among us, and isolation between us. There is lack of coordination. All these barriers we have to revisit and learn a lot of things.
I was reflecting on, is the focus an individual or a community one? I was wondering if achieving self-reliance, you focus primarily on individuals or you focus primarily on their communities? As Hafsar was talking, this is what were running through my head, and I don't really have an answer yet, so I'll continue to reflect and discuss and exchange too. But it's a change perspective. Self-reliance is a situation where a specific refugee would say, now I'm self-reliant. It's not, you can't talk about self-reliance for an entire community at the same time. There's an important element of individual support. So what Hafsar was talking about, and the need to reach to the specific individual and specific person, is even more important now than it was when you just talk about, when you talk, you shouldn't say just talk about, when you talk about humanitarian assistance.
Does UNHCR have any sort of power to improve representation of stateless people or the means of advocacy? Because I think, Hafsar, in our first conversation, you had said something about that the advocacy that you do is, one, unpaid, and two, that every time you leave a country to go represent yourself or stateless people and advocate, that when you return, it sort of resets the clock on your legal status proceedings. So that is that's quite a disadvantage. So what's the solution here? And does UNHCR or comparable organization have any kind of power to start addressing this?
Oh no, but that's our mandate. Our mandate, the mandate of UNHCR is about refugees, but it's also about stateless. So that's, if an organization has been given a mandate for that, it's us. So it's our responsibility. The specific issue that Hafsar raised is something that we need to address as UNHCR.
For the sacrifices and risks that we have to take to be in this space is quite big. My citizenship application, after now 5 years being in New Zealand, was declined because I travel outside of the country so much to do this humanitarian work. So I said to the Department of Internal Affairs of New Zealand, I said, in my entire life of travel, I have never once traveled for the sake of vacation and leisure. Every single trip that I made after arriving to New Zealand is for humanitarian reason, is for the human right of displaced people, stateless people, and refugees. Why would you decline my citizenship application? They were like, well, the law is the law. And I have appealed it. It's nowhere closer. And then I send them an email. You know what? You can hold on my citizenship whatever long that you like. I cannot sit and be in the privilege life where I am now in New Zealand for the sake of getting citizenship, while I have so many important work to do outside. People are dying every single day. So it is, in a way, the people like myself should be empowered and rewarded for the important work that we do. But on the contrary, we are being punished. And for the first 2-3 times when I travel, when I come back to New Zealand, they will be like, are you sure you're allowed to come back? I said, of course, where will I go? And this is the country where I'm supposed to live. Because apparently some junior airport staff are not familiar with this refugee travel document. And then every single airport that I go across the globe, even at the airport ticket counter, they will be like interrogating me for an hour and half an hour to make sure if I'm allowed to board on the aircraft, if they will not be in trouble. All of that, in a way, it is very disrespectful. It is very dehumanizing for a human who is traveling, going beyond and above for the goodwill and to do something good, to be treated like this at the airport, at the immigration, and then the country itself said, no, you cannot become the citizen because you travel too much doing all this human rights work. So all of that. So it is still, I feel, not appreciated enough, and there are so many rooms for us to improve. And also UNHCR and other organizations who are in the position of power to actually do and more advocacy and influence further to recognize this work of statelessness community and to recognize this refugee travel document. We should not be treated like this all the time, and it is really frustrating, dehumanizing, disrespectful, as if you are a very dodgy person at the airport. That is my story of my life every single time I travel, and I'm traveling again tomorrow morning. Oh, well.
What I love about these conversations is that I think for some people, it's going to be the first time actually hearing what the challenges are, but also what it feels like. What are the feelings, the emotions, just the humanity of having to deal with these challenges over and over and over again.
After we finished recording, Lena and I had our own debrief about what stood out from Raouf and Hafsar's discussion.
They hold power within their own story. They hold power within their own lived experience, their own identities. And that's not recognized enough. I like the way they both talked about the question of moving past the singular identity of refugee or of asylum seeker, right? Because that is one of the persistent issues, right? When we talk about, the displacement crisis, or, so many refugees are coming up. It's like, the language that is used in mainstream media around the world, it's like, a surge of refugees or a swarm of migrants or things like that. Swarm is a lot, right? And, it's very dehumanizing. And to just call someone a refugee and nothing else can be dehumanizing. It can also be, as Hafsar noted, is that there is a certain sense of power in being able to say, well, I carry this identity and I know what I'm talking about. I know how to speak on this because I live it, understanding that it also exposes you. It also makes you vulnerable. So I think that condition, that, the duality of that, I think is really important to talk about, because that duality both complicates and also augments power.
It is interesting that it was a reoccurring conversation between the two of them, right? Like the power that there is in being able to represent yourself, or to have more representative groups at the table, but also the cost to those who are stateless, displaced, have been made refugees, to, the cost of being able to show up at the table, the cost of being able to somehow translate the anger and the deep frustration into a conversation that can be heard, into criticism that isn't so understandably, sharp and harsh, so that the person on the other side of things that might have the power to do something about it can actually hear it and doesn't get caught up in the criticism of it all.
It's interesting to sort of think about anger as almost a gift, right? In this realm, in the realm of advocacy for people's rights, that speaking honestly and with rawness and with authenticity, and without disrespecting the other person, but just channeling, just like exhibiting the anger and exhibiting that honesty. I think it's an act of faith. It's an act of love. And so I think Hafsar really pinpointed that and sort of demonstrated that to a certain extent, and talked about it constructively and generatively, and sort of, it's like it's an engine, right? To a certain extent in this realm. The embodying anger as an activist, it's often criticized. Like, you get called angry or you get called whatever, you don't get invited back to the table, etc. But it's an act of love. It's an act of faith to be able to sort of channel that anger into critical dialogue, into sort of holding up a mirror to someone. And I think Raouf heard it that way. I think there was enough, respect between the two of them and enough of a relation built up. I also think that he seems like the kind of person that hears it. I think we talked there's there are people who are power holders who are like, God, I didn't know people were this angry, or why are people so angry? And I think Raouf is not one of those people. I think what Hafsar was able to communicate so beautifully was the idea of collective leadership, which is, a concept that isn't always that well understood, and a concept of collective leadership for and by and with the people who are most affected, which in this case refugees and displaced persons, stateless people in their case.
Also, what an analogy, about the candlelight.
Oh, so beautiful.
I've never heard that one before. What a picture. It's so clear, right? Like power is not, I have to turn off your candlelight in order to turn mine on.
From my perspective, power comes with the elements of accountability and integrity, also with the responsibility. But then if people abuse it, it's become very dangerous thing. If people use it, it's become very important tools to do a lot of good things. Can it be shared? Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a like a, how do I say this? It's a like a candlelight. If you have fire on one candle and then you then go and lit all the candles in the room, you have more light in the room. It's become lighter, and you then chase out the dark. So the more the merrier. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Raouf, for this conversation.
Thank you very much for the pleasure.
I have learned so much from you.
Learned a lot from you. We'll stay in touch. Thank you very much.
PowerShift is a production of the New Humanitarian and the Center for Transformational Change. This podcast is hosted by me, Melissa Fundira, and moderated by Lina Srivastava. PowerShift is produced by Lina Srivastava, Freddie Boswell, and Melissa Fundira. Our editor is Erwin Loy. Our theme song is Chill 2.0 by Barno. Sound engineering by Tevin Sudi. You can find transcripts of all our podcasts on our website, thenewhumanitarian.org/podcast. If you or anyone you know would like to participate in future PowerShift conversations, email us at podcast@thenewhumanitarian.org with the subject line PowerShift and tell us who you want to talk to. This is the last episode of PowerShift for a little while. Thank you to Hafsar, Raouf, and to Michael and Nadine for taking part in this experiment and dialogue across the power spectrum. To those of you who have listened, thank you so much. If this podcast has resonated with you or sparked conversation about the role of dialogue in shifting power in aid, we'd love to hear from you. Again, that's podcast@thenewhumanitarian.org or find us across social media. Until next time, thank you for joining us on PowerShift.